Alright, this recording is going to be about how you set up VLAN firewall rules, or specifically firewall rules on separate subnets. Alright, so let's say you got a Pfsense firewall here. Alright, so normally on your typical flat VLAN, let me grab a pen here. You're going to have your firewall connected to some type of switch. Now to do VLANs, you're going to need a smart switch. And then that smart switch would be connected to your different peripherals. So you'll have maybe a server. Here we just use the FTP server. Maybe a laptop. I throw an IP phone in the mix there. So from the switch you connect to your IP phone. From the IP phone you connect to the laptop. To have wireless, you're going to need some type of access point. And then you'll have a computer that's wireless. So normally, if you don't configure any VLANs, this will all be on the default VLAN, which is VLAN 1. So right there, the default is VLAN 1. So when you set up VLANs, you don't want to use VLAN 1. You want to use something other than VLAN 1. I recommend that you typically name your VLANs after the subnets. So let's say, this is assuming that you know about IP subnetting. If you don't and you want to know about it, just let me know and maybe I'll make another video on that. But let's say you use a subnet mask of a /27. So the bit length would be 27. So that's 255, 255, 255, 224. Alright. That would give you a host bits of 5. 2 to the 5th power is equal to 32. So your subnets would be 0, 32, 64, 96, so forth and so on. 128, you get the idea. 160. I'll enumerate them all. Why not? 192 and 224. That should be 8. Let's count them. It's your first subnet, your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth, your sixth, your seventh, and your eighth. The way you figure that out is, if you have 5 bits for host, that means you're borrowing 3 bits. 2 to the 3rd power is equal to 8, so you have 8 subnets. So why do you want to do subnets? Well, you want to do subnets when you have a network, say like this, where you have maybe an IP phone. You don't want your phone traffic to be on the same network as your users, because if you get a semi-smart user, they could snoop the traffic on your phone. So by putting the phone on a different VLAN, right, and you might hear me use the word VLAN and subnet interchangeably. VLAN is really a layer 2 way to segment a network, where a subnet is a layer 3 way to do that. But oftentimes when you create a new subnet, you're going to create a new VLAN, or at least you should, right? Maybe you want to put your servers on a different subnet than your users. That way you can control who has access to that server. If you don't do that, there's no way to really control it. Alright, maybe you might have some type of personal firewall on the server itself, but you want to be able to control everything through the firewall rules. That's why we kind of call this that. Let me grab a pen here. You want to control through the firewall rules, or grab this here, of your router. Alright, and this is important. I kind of went over another video on how you create VLANs on a Pfsense firewall, but I didn't go over. You then need to create an associated rule. I guess I just assumed that everybody knew that. Alright, so let's kind of enumerate this a little bit. So you wouldn't name the first VLAN VLAN 1. Maybe I might name that one VLAN 10. You can't use 0. Right? I believe VLANs, they're numbers, and they can be between 1 and 4095, I believe it is. Might be 4096, but I believe it's 4095. Typically, though, you don't want to use anything over 4000. Usually anything over 4000 is reserved for the ISP. And you want to actually refer to the documentation on all of your equipment, because some equipment can't use a VLAN tag higher than a particular number. This is another thing that's important to understand. When you create VLANs on your Pfsense firewall, all traffic leaving this firewall will be tagged with the appropriate VLAN. So say for example, we're going to come over here. So here are the different LANs, if you will, that we're going to create. We're going to create a let's create a local area network, and that's going to be VLAN 10, and that's going to be subnet 0, or what we enumerated over here as 1. So that's going to be and let's use the network 10.0.0.0/27. So this is going to be 10.0.0.0 all the way to 31. And then we're going to create a separate LAN for wireless. We'll call that we'll call that VLAN 32, and that's going to be from 32 all the way to 63. Then let's create servers. Why not? And that's going to be 64 to 95. And do we need anything else? We need voice, right? So we'll call voice. It will go from 96 to 127. So we got that enumerated. So how would you do it? You would follow my video from before where you would create the VLANs, but then here's where you need the smart switch, right? You have to follow documentation for your switch, but I showed you in Cisco how you would do it. You need to create the VLANs on the switch. If you were to connect the Pfsense directly to, say, an access point, say you have a Netgear wireless router and you want to turn it into an access point, so you take the Netgear router and you plug from your Pfsense firewall directly into the Pfsense access point, and or your Netgear wireless router, and you don't have, say, DDWRT or OpenWRT on there. All the traffic going to your wireless router will be tagged, right? Meaning Pfsense is going to indicate that all of the, you have to look at the Ethernet frame, but in there's going to be a VLAN tag, right? And that VLAN tag is going to say 32. And if this wireless router sends that traffic to this computer with a VLAN tag on it, the computer will drop it. Most end devices will ignore traffic that has a VLAN tag on it. So what you need is, you need some type of operating system, probably DDWRT, where you could say traffic coming in on, so on the back here, let's look at the back of your typical router. You'll have a WAN port, might say internet, and then you'll have some switch ports, typically 4. So if you connect from the Pfsense directly, we'll come over here to port number 1, then this traffic is going to be tagged. Alright, and everything on here is going to have a VLAN tag. It won't work that way. So what you need to do is you need to create a tag port coming from your Pfsense firewall to your switch. Right, it has to be tagged. If not, it won't work. Alright, so you got the tag port, and then you're going to specify to the switch that everything coming out of, so your switch, let's say it's an 8-port switch, just because I don't feel like writing more ports than that. So they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right, and say port number 1 is going to go to your access point now. Alright, so here, and port number 8, I usually like to do the last port. Go back to my firewall. So this port's going to be tagged, meaning all the VLANs will be tagged on this. Then on port number 1, we're going to say this is going to be on private VLAN ID is 32. So everything on this port will be on VLAN 32, but it's untagged. That's the key there. It has to be untagged. And now all your wireless traffic will be untagged. Now if you have a more fancier access point, which is probably what you want to do, there you can have another tagged port. Cisco calls it a trunk port. Go into here, which would have on multiple tag traffic. So this would have VLANs 32, 64, 10, everything we just did, 95, 96, excuse me. It's going to have all of this on here. That way you can set up SSIDs based on the VLAN ID. Again, if you have a router that supports DDWRT, you're good, because that will work. I think somebody hit me up in the comments. That's probably what your problem is that you're sending tag traffic to your equipment that can't take tag traffic. Now on Windows, you could go under the network properties, I believe, and specify that all traffic leaving your computer should be tagged, but that's a terrible way to do that. Just put DDWRT on your wireless router. Do that at your own risk. Right? Sometimes people ask me questions, but sometimes you get the sense that they don't really understand the basics. And so if you don't understand the basics, you probably shouldn't be doing any of this. Alright, just to finish this out, and I should probably clean some of this up a little bit. Wow. Let me go grab an eraser. See what we could do here. So we'll clean this up and I'll show you guys how it's supposed to be done. I probably need to do some editing of this video, but I'm not going to. We'll finish this up shortly. So we set up the VLANs inside of Pfsense. We'll do that on the switch. Alright, we have an access point where we can set up the VLANs there. By the way, what's nice about Cisco is Cisco supports something called VTP. It's the VLAN trunking protocol. And what's nice about that is that you can create the VLANs in your switch, and then all of the information gets propagated to, so like say you connect another switch, the VLANs will be created there as well. When you go non-Cisco, you got to create the VLANs everywhere. Now, there's all kinds of issues that you can get in with VLANs and pruning, sending all the VLANs to every device, even if users on that particular switch don't need that VLAN or shouldn't have access. We won't get into all of that. Really, my main focus of this video is I want to show you how to create these rules. So when you do create the VLANs, you won't have any issues. Right? Like I said, in the previous video, I showed you how to create the VLANs on the switch. If you have a Cisco phone and your switch supports CDP, Cisco Discovery Protocol, the phone should pick up the VLAN on which it should be on. Inside of Pfsense, and I guess I'll show you on here, you need to specify the TFTP server in the DHCP options. They have an option there already, but you can also go down and add option 150, which is also TFTP. And then you're good to go. So let's pull up a browser. And this is the Microsoft Edge browser right here. Now I have a test Pfsense, so we'll go to that. When you log in, like I showed you before, you have the different VLANs here. So I have a VLAN 500, but I'm going to add another VLAN. Actually, let me go back to my assignments. I want to see. So my LAN is on EM1, so I'm just going to create a VLAN 32. And we're going to put that on interface EM1. Your switch also has to support 802.1q, which I believe I explained, and then what did I say this was? Doesn't really matter, we'll call it wireless. We'll save that. Then we have to go back over to interface assignment. Then we're going to add a new interface. It's called option 1, and we are going to, it's going to be VLAN 32 on EM1. We click save. Now we have that. So we go over to interfaces, we see option 1. We'll enable it, and we'll call it wireless. And you'll give it an IP address. So let's see what we use for our LAN. We use the full subnet, so actually we use the whole network, not a subnet. So you know what, we'll use 80. We'll use 192.168.80.0. But what we could have done, which I was explaining earlier, and let me see if I can get me a text box here. We could have used 10.0.0.0. That would be 1. 10.0.0.32 would be the next network. 10.0.0.0.64. 10.0.0.96. 10.0.0.128, 10.0.0.160, 10.0.0.192, and 10.0.0.224. Right, but in our case, since our network, we're not gonna use that. We're gonna use 192.168.80.0, and that's gonna be a /24. So a whole new network itself. You can't have overlapping networks on different interfaces. By the way, Cisco, they call this sub-interfacing. So basically, you're going to have a physical port. So the whole idea about using VLANs is assuming that you have a router that only has maybe 2 ports on it. I think I chose the wrong pen. Let's see. Let me get a thicker line. So you got one port that goes up to the internet, and then you have another port that goes to the switch, but you want to have different networks. So you're going to sub-interface it or create what's called virtual interfaces. Alright, so you can't have your virtual interface on, say, this network, and then have another virtual interface on the same network, because the router won't work that way. So you want to use a different network. So that's what we're doing here. I feel like I'm rambling, but hopefully this comes out clear for you guys. So we'll come back over to our video here. So we'll come back to the interface that we just created because we didn't assign. And we're going to give it a static IP. And we'll give it an IP address of 192.168.80.1. And remember, we're using a /24, though even in my example, if I was using 27, you could do that. And we'll click Save. And we'll apply. Your first LAN has a default rule to allow all traffic out. Every interface you create after that will not. So you need to come over here to Firewall Rules. Then you come over here to your wireless and see how there's no rules. You need to come here and add a default rule. So we don't want just TCP, we want to allow any protocol. So this is what we call the any rule. And then we just put in here, allow all traffic out. And you click Save. And click Apply. That's it. You created a VLAN on your switch or your router. You then created an associated rule. Well, you assign that VLAN to an interface, and then you created an associated rule to allow all traffic out of that interface. Alright. And really that's it. You're going to have to refer to your documentation on how to create the VLAN on your particular switch. But then remember I said the key is for equipment that, like a computer, it can't take tag traffic. Even maybe a server, you kind of don't want to send tag traffic to it. You want to send untagged traffic to it. So you want to come down to your switch and you want to create an untagged. So if you're dealing with anything other than Cisco, typically the port needs to be untagged. Some equipment you have to set up a private VLAN or the PVID ID. You just have to read your documentation. In Cisco, it's tagged. It's trunk ports and access ports, which I showed you in the last video. Alright, I hope this has been helpful, and if you guys like it, please subscribe. Thanks.